Thank you all so much for coming tonight. As Miss Aldretti said, the title of tonight's story is The Magic Quirt by L. Ron Hubbard. Now, just so you know, a quirt is a short-handled riding whip with a braided leather lash. Now you know. This story was originally published in June 1948 in a publication called The Rio Kid Western, a thrilling publication. Our performance is a combination of old-style radio storytelling and a live theater production. Everybody, please enjoy the show. The Magic Quirt by L. Ron Hubbard.
Get up there, you Mac! Get up, Bessie! Concern ye for a pair of busted down, wall-eyed, spavining Lorena Pete's? Getting so a man can't even get 10 winks on his own chuck wagon without you buzzard baits clowning up.
Old Laramie curled 20 feet of whip into a powerful pop about their ears, and the pair of swaybacks began to pull once more. The chuck wagon clattered and rolled over the last small hump and started down the curving, treacherous trail which led into and through Daly Canyon. A horse is often wiser than a preoccupied man, and Bessie or Mac might have had something to say if they could talk, for two wagons wouldn't pass on this narrow trail. They let the whip pop away their caution, and downward they shuffled. When the horses had shied and stopped, he had been halfway through a little book titled The Secret of Power, a 25-lesson course in the occult sciences, giving the student positive control of his fellow man. That was for Old Laramie. By gad, if he didn't get some control over something pretty soon, he was going to turn digger engine complete with breech clout and let them all go to the devil. For ever since Lee Jacoby had come as foreman to the Lazy G, the life of Old Laramie had been worth less than a second-hand chaw of old mule.
Hey, you cookie!
Lee Jacoby would howl.
You call this chuck? What did you make it to shoe horses with?
Or,
my God, Cookie, I didn't know you was an expert in mixing poisons. Boys, we ain't got a cook. We got an apothecary. Throw it out and get me some ham and eggs.
it was the quality of the wit which injured. For as an old-time chef of the cow camps, Laramie was not unused to joshing. But ye gods, it ought to at least be funny. And it never, never, never ought to be followed up by dumping perfectly edible chuck on the ground. The punchers of the Lazy G followed the leader. They weren't the old crowd. Ever since the kid's pa got killed in Laredo, old hands had been drifting. First came Lee Jacoby with his cock-of-the-walk brutality, and then followed Rannies, who better suited the foreman's taste. They never consulted the kid. Young Tom Gregory had lost his mother when he was born, and his old man when he was 13. And now at 14, he was owner in title only. The Crawford County Bank, meaning Old Man Williamson, actually running the spread. It was all legal enough, but things were happening. One of these days, the kid would have to drift penniless, and old Laramie was trying hard to stand by.
Ah, cracky,
Sighed old Laramie, thumb in the book and eyes vacant.
if I could do just 1/16 the things this Hindu filler says I can, I could run that Lee Jacoby plummet off the range. And Williamson to boot.
He looked back into the book, read a moment, and then growled with determination.
And them Bolger twins likewise.
Wrapped in this glorious dream, he didn't even begin to hear what was happening ahead. He drew an imaginary gun from an imaginary holster and said to the imaginary Gus Bolger, the same that had shot the kid's paw,
Ye powerless, with a magic wave of my left paw, I create you a statue. And with a quick thumbing of my right, I create you a corpse. Bang! Oh! Oh!
But it wasn't old Laramie's imaginary gun. It was a real honest-to-God shooting iron. And Bessie and Mac recognized it as such, reared against the remorseless weight of the unbraked wagon, got shoved ahead, reared again, and then, bronc fashion, scared to death, lit out like a cannonball stage, straight down the curving road. He tried to grind home the brake shoe, but he missed and had to use both hands and both feet to hold on. The reins were loosely tied to the brake, and to reach them was impossible. He couldn't reach his rabbit's foot, and his little Jim Dandy guaranteed lucky ring was carelessly left in camp. Old Laramie, once upon a time, had been as tough as the next one, but 3 bullet holes, a sense of defeat, and old age had ended that. He screamed like a wounded mountain lion, the scenery blurred by. The chuck wagon finished the curve on 2 wheels, swapped to the other 2, came back, and tried to lean over the 100-foot drop into the dry stream bed. Straight ahead were 6 pack animals clinging to the cliff beside the road as only burros can do. Directly in the track of the plunging wagon were 2 mounted men, holding guns on somebody or something out of old Laramie's view. They gave a white-eyed look at the comedy wagon and dug spur. The riders were out of sight, still going later, when Mac, tangling with a side-swept burro, upset the chuck wagon in flat and loud in the middle of the road. Old Laramie floated to an easy landing with sand and sagebrush. The sound of breaking crockery gradually ceased to echo in the surrounding arroyos. The dust dropped slowly down in the dusk. The chuck wagon, however, had spilled everything from frying pans to cockroaches.
Gracias, gracias. Sí, ayudamos, ayudamos. Gracias, amigo. Gracias infinitas para mandando.
Old Laramie understood very little Spanish, but he knew he was being thanked, and he turned to find a small, slim Indian from over the line, waddling up, bowing and advancing. A woman came off a rock above the trail carrying a baby. It was a very strange thing, thought old Laramie. Sure, these Mexican Indians didn't seem to be good bait for the outlaws. The flood of Spanish went on with much flinging of the arms, and when it seemed that he was about to get kissed by the woman, Laramie got rough.
Hell! It wasn't nothing. Give me a hand with this here wagon.
They gave him a hand. Laramie picked up groceries and pans while the man and his wife aided to rig a block and tackle to right the wagon. It was quite dark when the task was done, and Laramie, less breakage, was ready to proceed on his way. He was getting mighty anxious when he thought of how Lee Jacoby would take this, for he should have been at Camp 7 something before supper time. The little Indian was jabbering with more thanks.
Oh, quit it! I would have done it for anybody, but just now I gotta go.
Señor,
What?
Supago.
Oh, you pago yourself. But I gotta go. I'm going to be roasted, cloves, hoofs, and hide, as it is.
The Indian was pulling forth a fat sack.
No.
From it, he poured a small torrent of silver and gold coins. Laramie's eyes popped, so that was the bait. But he found that he was about to be paid. This unsettled him.
No! Dang it! You ornery little cactus eater! I didn't do you no favors on purpose. My horses run away and...
The Indian tried to push the money at him, but he finally succeeded in pushing it back. There was an immediate conference between the Mexican and his wife, and finally the man went to the sad little burrows and dug into a pack. The thing which he now extended to Laramie glittered in the starlight, and the man made a valiant attempt at English.
Senor, see? This thing? Latigo, whoosh, make big man, muy fuerte man. Latigo, whoosh, he take, make big man, muy fuerte man.
Oh, hey,
Me,
what are you?
not Indian. Me, Aztec. You sabi.
Hey,
You sabi. He
He
sabi.
sabi.
He sabi.
oh,
Yuki. You big man. Mucho lucky. Mucho. Vamos.
Puzzled, Laramie took the object and found it to be a silver-mounted quirt. He was too anxious to get to count 7 to delay, and so, saluting with the quirt, hastily got started before the thanks began again. Mac and Bessie picked their way amongst the rocks of the canyon and soon came out on the flat, where in the distance a fire marked the whereabouts of Camp 7. Laramie drew up beside the blaze and found Lee Jacoby standing there, eyeing him with his usual evil glare, and perhaps something more. Without palaver, Laramie got down, threw the back of the wagon open, and hurriedly began to throw cold beans and sow belly in the direction of the blaze. Working so fast, he was nearly a blur. He had supper ready for 10 plates in less than 15 minutes. With an occasional grin and jibe, the punchers jostled each other past and carrying their handouts and coffee mugs to nearby stones, soon ended the meal. All this time, Lee Jacoby had said nothing. The silence was worse than a tongue lashing, and when Laramie had handed the big black-eyed devil his chuck, the old cook shuddered. But still, Lee Jacoby said nothing. Later, when he was cleaning up, Laramie ruminated upon it uncomfortably, and the kid, coming up, had to speak twice before Laramie heard him.
Oh, hello, kid.
He stopped and looked closely at the youngster. It was plain, even by the fitful firelight, that the kid had been crying.
What's up, kid?
Nothing, Laramie.
Oh, working too hard, maybe?
Nah. Hell, it'd be relief to work. I just rode out to see how things was doing here.
Oh, well, somebody dress you down, maybe?
Nah. Who do I care for these big stiffs?
Well, maybe the bank, huh?
The kid was silent and quickly changed the subject.
That grub sure was welcome, Laramie. Ever since Singley quit the main ranch, I just about starved to death.
Sing Lee? Oh, come on now, kid. Why would he quit? Pot jumping sassafras if somebody's
Nah, Laramie. It just had to be that way, that's all. Williamson said a private cook for the owner might have been alright when my pa was alive. But it was silly paying a chink just to feed one boy. It's the beginning of the end, Laramie. We stopped disappearing.
Kid, I've been out in the camps for 3 solid weeks, and today was out of grub. and had to go into Crawford, and that's about as near the news as I've been in a month. Why in the name of Beelzebub didn't you tell Williamson to go to hell? Why, if I'd been there...
But he broke it off, suddenly ashamed. If he'd been there, he would have done nothing. It was hell to have your nerve gone. There had been a time when he hadn't been Old Laramie. Young Laramie had been a gentleman to walk soft around. But that was before Bill Thompson. If he'd been there, he wouldn't have done a thing. He got back to his dishes, the water raw and stinging on the scar of his gun hand. The kid started to dry on a flour sack.
Them damn Boulder twins rode through about an hour back,
He said, conversationally.
Seemed like they were in a hurry, horses all lather.
No! By the eternal! By the eternal! There's who it was!
And he promptly told the kid in confidence what had happened back in Daly Canyon. Nearly finished, he reached into the wagon and pulled out the quirt.
Say, that's foo for all.
And he turned it around in his hands.
What he say?
Oh, he said, oh, hell, I could never get a hang of that spiggity stuff. He said he was Aztec, and this thing here would make me a big man or something.
Aztec? Say, Laramie, there's an Aztec priest lives over by the Blue Butte. Regular medicine man he is. Cave full of bats and stone idols. I've been over there 6-7 times maybe, but I never had nerve to walk right up to the place. But one day, nobody was home. And I read close by and peeked in. And say, Laramie, he'd make your blood run cold. Stone idols with big green eyes. I bet he make human sacrifices and everything.
Laramie looked wonderingly at the kid and then at the quirt. For the first time, he saw the design. The handle consisted of a coiled serpent whose head was the top, and 2 great green eyes stared back at him. Suddenly, he felt bewitched and thrust the gift from him.
You're lucky he didn't put no spell on you. I remember when Singly almost jumped out the window when that old Aztec come up to the door. Singly said he was a devil with an evil eye. If I was you, I'd put that away mighty careful. There's no telling what it might be.
Half hypnotized by the green-eyed serpent, Old Laramie shoved it out of sight, he knew not quite where in the darkness. He had not the benefit, any more than the unlettered kid, of a higher education, which sternly forbade superstition. And besides, that snake was enough to give anybody the creeps. The fire burned low, and the punchers took to their bedrolls, and Old Laramie soon slept between the wagon wheels, wondering about what would happen to the kid, wondering about why Lee Jacoby hadn't jumped him, and then tangling all in a series of dreams which culminated in a nightmare so horrible that it brought him stifled from out of his blankets, pawing for his foes, every hair erect on his head. A moon cast a sickly light across the plains. It was still, it was lonely. Old Laramie's heart quieted down and he sank back. But the bed was uncommonly uncomfortable and he twisted about for minutes before he finally investigated. It was the quirt. He had shoved it into his blankets in error and on retiring had mistaken it for a rock. He whipped it out and it glittered in the moonlight, the 2 green eyes glaring at him.
Make big man.
The little engine had said. Old Laramie scowled. But it was a funny thing about the quirt. Didn't seem to be so unfriendly now. As he looked at it, a quietness stole over him. Supposing, he sighed as he lay back and covered his head, supposing that was really true. Supposing that just by owning this quirt, a man got to be big and powerful. That was a comfortable thought. Suddenly, He sat upright and worked his blanket toward the tailboard. He reached up with a knowing hand and brought down one of his books. He thumbed the pages in the unsteady light of a match.
But amongst all other magical religions, that of the Aztecs was the most powerful according to record. Those tribes which lived in Arizona and New Mexico at the time of the Spaniards' coming were found to be in possession of much black magic, accounts of which had come fragmentarily to us from the early explorers. It is said that some of these Aztec priests could produce howling storms at will, and it was in one such that 5 men of the party of Juan Perez perished. They had also the power of amulets and charms, which in their use would protect the wearer against evil and create him a demon to his enemies. It is stated in the Perez Journal that by the use of such a charm, one priest was able to withstand the shock of 5 Spanish troopers riding him down at full charge with lances. Unaccountably, 2 of the troopers fell dead during the attack. The feathered serpent played a large part in the rituals of Aztec magic.
Unsteadily, Old Laramie grabbed the quirt. The flaring match showed him something he had previously overlooked. The serpent on the handle had feathers, feathers which gleamed palely by the light of the moon. Next morning, Old Laramie ladled out the hotcakes to the men with an air of grand disdain. It was early, still dark, and the punchers were either too sleepy or too hungry to notice. For once, no one made fast comments on the quality of the food, and when they came back for thirds, Old Laramie banged down a lid and began to clear away. There was no argument. The sun came up shortly after the last cayuse had been manhandled into servility for the day's work. Old Laramie stood around the deserted camp, flicking his scuffed boot with the quirt and admiring the scenery. How clean and clear it all looked. He sang contentedly as he strolled, and so engrossed was he in the atmosphere that he didn't hear Lee Jacoby coming up.
Cookie!
Out of habit, Laramie turned in fright.
Get down to the hole.
His new courage was too strong to be put down.
Well, get down to the holding corral and help the boys with the wire. It's been cut in 50 places, and we need help. Now get!
Laramie looked coldly at the foreman. Flicking his scuffed boot with the quirt, he said,
Since when, Mr. Foreman Jacoby, does the cook mend wire?
Since now!
Well, Mr. Foreman Jacoby, there's your truck wagon and you know where you can put it. Me, I'm cutting me out a horse and drifting into town for amusement. I'll take $57.29 wages here and now.
Jacoby blinked at the stern face. Suddenly, he yanked a pad out of his Levi's and wrote a note with a pencil stub. This he threw at the cook. Without further conversation, Jacoby wheeled his bay and rode out of the camp. Old Laramie grinned insolently. He gave the quirt a masterful spin and flicked the fallen note so that it rose to his hand.
Mr. Williamson, pay bearer $59 in wages. Also, send new cook today. Jacoby, Camp 7.
Laramie cut himself out a mean-eyed sorrel, pulled his saddle gear out of the chuck wagon, and with his worldly possessions on the cantle behind him, rode in great dignity due north across the flat to re-enter Daly Canyon. He'd gone about 3 miles and had just finished contemplating his scene of triumph in great magnification when hoofbeats rolled up the road behind him. The kid drew up beside him on a blowing American saddler.
Gee whiz, Laramie. Gee whiz, you're not walking out. Gee whiz, to the last man left of the old outfit. Come on, Laramie. Please don't do that. You don't know.
Sonny, if you want to take a ride, come along with me into town and watch my triumph.
Saying which, old Laramie produced a Colt 44 from thin air and blew a straggling cactus clean out of the ground. He puffed the smoke from the barrel and slid the weapon into his holster.
Gee, what's up, Laramie?
The old puncher grandly ignored the boy, and they rode through the warming day toward Crawford. After a couple of hours, the false fronts and dobe of the town shimmered into sight through the heat waves. Laramie tied the mean sorrel up to the rail in front of the bank.
You wait here,
he said, and, bowlegs creaking, waddled into the front door of the bank. It was dim and cool in the interior, and he saw Williamson behind the counter at a desk. Without ceremony, old Laramie shoved through the gate and dug the note from his belt and tossed it on the desk. Williamson was looking at him oddly. He hid a deal of craftiness under a large amount of false bluster. He seemed to have no bluster left, however. Without taking his fascinated gaze off Laramie, he picked up the note. After a little, he distracted himself enough to read the words.
Give this man his pay,
said Williamson to the cashier, and then to old Laramie.
Are you, leaving town?
I don't reckon I will for a spell.
This seemed to give Williamson a great deal of reason to think. He retreated to his desk and sat there staring at Laramie. The puncher yanked his money to him and stuffed it in his belt. With one last truculent glare at Williamson, he went out into the glaring sunlight and untied his sorrel.
What's it all about?
Everything going just fine.
He led his horse down the street to the Oasis Saloon and tied him up again. The kid tagged in after him, wondering if Laramie meant to go on him drunk. But Laramie passed straight on by the bar and came up before a faro layout. The gambler was amusing herself in the deserted house by betting small sums against her own bank. She had had a good lunch and felt peaceful. She smiled woodenly at Laramie, very glad to have a customer who might, even this early in the day, attract others. "Looking to do some gambling?" said the dealer, unnecessarily. With a flip, Laramie threw the gold piece on the bar. The dealer swept the double eagle into the till and advanced $20 worth of chips. She shuffled the deck, cut it, and thrust it into the dealing box. The face-up card showing in the deal box was the 10 of diamonds. Unreasonably, since there were only 3 more 10s in that deck, Laramie tossed $5 on the spade 10 on the layout. She laid the face-up card aside, her long white fingers sliding it smoothly out of the box. The 6 of hearts came into view. This, being the losing card, she slid out and placed beside the box. And as it slid, the 10 of clubs came startlingly into view. The dealer permitted no sign of surprise to escape her. She paid the bet, kept the case on a board beside her, watched for Laramie to make his next bet. She permitted again no sign of amazement, for Laramie let it all ride on the 10 to win. Neatly, the dealer discarded the last winning card and disclosed the 3 of diamonds as the next loser. This she laid beside the box, starting a precise pile. She blinked ever so slightly, for there lay the 10 of spades. There was just a hint of jerk in her hand as she tumbled out the chips. The dealer discarded. The next losing card was the 3 of spades, and with a yank, which she intended to be triumphant, the dealer pulled it and started to lay it in the neat pile. Her hand halted midair, for the 10 of hearts had been disclosed to full view. Angrily, the dealer thumped the chips down on Laramie's bet, and by now the pile was spilling both ways. Laramie raked it all in, unsmiling, confident, and laid 4 blues before him.
And now, I think I'll try aces.
The dealer permitted herself a private grin. She'd get that stack back, no fear of that. And so she put the discard aside, laid out the 9 of clubs as the loser, and then scowled blackly at the ace of diamonds, which beamed at her from the deal box. Chips nearly cracked as she paid the debt.
Letting it ride.
Nope. That next winner's gonna be a 2-spot.
And he bet 8 blues to prove it.
And if you twist the deck around any, your lungs could sure stand some ventilation.
The dealer discarded, disclosing the jack of spades as the loser, and then slipped this out to find the 2 of spades lying in full view. The kid understood very little of faro and cared less. He wandered out into the street and watched 2 dogs fighting half-heartedly in the heavy dust of the road. This was so slow that he glanced around for greater amusement and was rooted by the sight of Gus Bolger stepping out on the sidewalk before the bank with Williamson at his elbow. He knew it was Gus, for he was the smaller of the fraternal twins. Gus Bolger turned from the banker and waved covertly to someone across the street. Then, keeping to the wall, Bolger came toward the oasis, hand resting on his gun butt. The kid trusted he had not been seen. He backed hastily into the oasis and sprinted to the faro layout.
Laramie! Laramie! Gus Boulder's coming in here!
Don't pester me, sonny,
said old Laramie with impatience, for he had just lost his first bet, and though it had been small, it bothered him. He was about to place his next when the import of the kid's message came into his brain. He heard a light footfall in the door and whirled. Gus Bolger stood, lightly balanced, leaning slightly forward, gun hand tense and still at his side.
You, there at the table, come outside. I want to talk with you.
Laramie felt his heart start to climb, and then the quirt brushed his leg. He steadied.
if you're so anxious to converse, I reckon this is as good a spot as any.
He was aware of the dealer ducking into cover and the lone bartender vanishing behind the glasses on the bar.
Come along here. You wouldn't want to make trouble.
I ain't making no trouble, but maybe I'll unmake some. Say your say, Bolger, or draw if you ain't too yeller.
The kid was shaking as he moved to one side. He had no gun, and his only friend in the world was about to leave it. For Bolger was known for these things, and the kid's pa, though it was said in Laredo that the break was far from even, had been killed by this very man. Bolger's hand blurred, his left stabbed down a fan, but he never connected with his hammer. 3 shots. 3 shots tied together and loud as doom shook Gus Bolger back, back, back. Bolger, dead even as he fell, lurched into the window and fell sideways amid a shower of glass upon the boardwalk. The last piece shook free from the arch which said Oasis, and fell with one last musical tinkle. With a quick sprint, old Laramie reached the body, gun ready just in case. But his last shot had been high, and there wasn't any reason to suspect from the look of the face that Bulger would terrorize anyone again.
Look out!
Laramie dived sideways, and a slug tore splinters from the walk where an instant before he had stood. Laramie wheeled toward the shot, still falling sideways. Across the street, Winchester raised and sighted, was Ray Bulger, striving insanely to get Laramie in his sights again. Ray Bulger dived out of leather and behind one of the fire barrels which lay at intervals in the street. Laramie scrambled under a hitch rail and took cover behind the Oasis watering trough. A slug struck a nail and glanced away with a shrill metallic yowl. With an unsteady hand, Laramie replaced the 3 empties in his .44. He saw the kid hovering in the doorway behind him.
Get out there!
The kid dived back into the shadows, and another slug broke the remaining window of the Oasis. But the shot had caused Ray Bulger his cover for an instant, and Laramie took a snapshot at the exposed gun barrel in hand. The shot was too tough, and the next moment another bullet yowled away from the trough. A third drove into the corner, and a stream of water jetted out to raise dust as it hit. Laramie gripped the quirt. He looked behind him and saw a 3-foot opening under the high boardwalk. Snake fashion, keeping cover with the water trough, he went under the walk, and in its shadow worked his way 10 feet to the left. Anxiously, Bulger was seeking his enemy, exposing part of his face, then his shoulder. Drawing very careful aim, the old cowpuncher sighted and let the hammer fall. The bullet glanced from the side of the water barrel and tore flying splinters away. Blinded and crazed with the pain of his lacerated eyes, Bulger sprang up and took the second shot squarely in the chest. Laramie cautiously sidled across the street, eyes leery for another attack. He rolled Ray Bulger over with his foot. The man was breathing hoarsely. There was a flurry of action in front of the bank a moment later. Williamson caught up the kid's American saddle from the hitch rack, mounted, and started to spur away. Laramie blinked, saw the wild, backward glance Williamson gave him, which suddenly made sense. He levered a new cartridge into Bulger's Winchester and very careful laid his sights. Laramie squeezed the trigger. He thought he saw the banker lurch, but he did not fall, and the saddler went streaking out of range. A doctor came shortly, still in her shirt sleeves as she had napped after lunch. She shook her head over Ray Bulger, but had the man taken into the Oasis and laid on the pool table. The kid was standing pop-eyed before old Laramie. Several citizens stood back at respectful distances and stared. Laramie took a long breath, hit his boot with a quirt, and with something like a swashbuckling air, went down to the sheriff's office to give himself up. The sheriff was not there, and a deputy, following discreetly, told Laramie in a courteous voice that he didn't have any authority, not having a warrant.
The sheriff? He went out to go check on some rustling,
Explained the deputy.
and he won't be back for a couple hours or so. Have a seat, sir.
Laramie sat down in the sheriff's chair, put his spurs amongst the scattered reward posters, and built himself a cigarette. He was grandly unconscious of the citizens who, too late for the shooting, tried to look indifferent as they strolled by and stared in. Soon a small knot of boys had to be dispersed by the deputy, who came back heartened.
Sheriff's coming up the road now. Got somebody with him by the looks of it. You wait just a minute, he'll be right here.
The sheriff dismounted and, thrusting people to one side and the other, gained his office. He had already been told by only slightly coherent witnesses in the last 10 feet that he had a big gunman in there waiting to give himself up.
Come on in, Lee.
Lee Jacoby looked nervous. He glanced at the people trying to make out what was going on, and then, with a cinch on his nerves, started to walk in.
Damn, Bulgers, was just about the toughest customers we ever had in these parts. I reckon.
Lee Jacoby stopped. He hesitated and then began to back away, hand on his gun.
Come on, Lee.
Insisted the sheriff.
Why, what the hell?
Laramie had gotten out of the chair at the first mention of Lee. He cat-footed to the door, and there in the glaring daylight saw the foreman backing.
Stop him!
Cried Laramie, more lights dawning.
Stop him! Quick!
Sheriff Quayle never moved quicker than the spectators. He stepped to one side in the cleared lane, not knowing which man might be what. The deputy got himself a desk as a bullet backstop.
Drop your gun or I'll blow you in half!
Lee Jacoby foolishly grunted in relief. He had been expecting at least a U.S. deputy marshal, but Laramie?
Stand where you be, Sheriff. First man makes a move to stop me is a death.
He had reached his horse and was about to mount.
Come down or I'll shoot!
The old man never saw Lee Jacoby draw. There was a flame and a smashing blow on Laramie's hip and another which spun him half around. He fell across the doorway.
Next man gets ideas, gets the same!
Shouted Jacoby and completed the mount. He started to swing away, smoking gun covering them all. 3 explosions, almost together, tore at people's nerves. The sheriff ducked back, and when he looked again, Jacoby's horse was running crazily up the boardwalk across the street, and one Lee Jacoby was slowly falling into himself in the dust. The foreman's fallen gun was turning like a small pinwheel in the dirt. After a while, when they had thrown a blanket over the body, they tried to pick Laramie off the walk, but he was not in the mood to be manhandled.
Oh, get off me! Gollies, it's getting so a man can't even rest without a stampede making a trail out of him. Oh.
They helped him to his feet and looked for blood, and there was blood. The slug had struck his cartridge belt, exploding 2 bullets, which, in their turn, had given him flesh wounds in the left armpit. But even so, the bruises made it hard for him to walk.
Sheriff,
Said the doctor.
Ray wants a word with you before he passes. What's this? Another one?
It's Bunker Hill Day.
Said the sheriff. He started to the oasis.
No, he's in the Emporium. He said he didn't want to die in the saloon with his boots on, so he's in amongst the dress goods. If that makes any difference.
The kid helped old Laramie to follow, and they found the dying gunman holding on hard to what life remained.
All right, Bulger.
Said the sheriff.
What is it?
I got something to say. The old and got Lee, didn't he?
Dead center.
I ain't no Sunday school boy. But I got my ideals. Got any fault to find with that?
None.
Well, I tell you, I ain't going to hell with murder on my soul. Gus is dead, Lee is dead, and the old sawbone says I won't be long. It was me who done in Tom Gregory, this kid's pa in Laredo. Gus stood him up for a showdown, and pretended to draw. I shot him from an alley.
He brooded for a moment and then...
He never even seen me. And it wasn't even because I didn't like him. He was always straight with us. So I got another score to pay off. It's Williamson. Go down and get him. Cause it was him paid me and Gus to kill Gregory. Get Williamson and hang him for murder. Cause he's killed Gus and Lee and Gregory, and all because he wanted money. Money ain't worth a damn compared to a man's life, is it?
He saw then that they knew he was crying because he wanted to live, and the day was bright.
Get the hell out of here!
Wait a minute, Ray. You say Williamson did something. But what?
Ray Bolger looked at him incredulously.
You mean you wasn't told?
What's what?
Why, hell, Williamson was the one that hired us to kill Gregory. He put Lee in charge as foreman of the Lazy G, and then he hired us to rustle stock off the Lazy G so he could force out young Gregory. We run the stock over the border, but the Mexicans took it and sent the pay back by an old Indian. Aztec, he said he was, but I don't savvy too much Spanish. Gus did that. Used a bunch of kids and packed burros as a blind and came up here to tip us off for the next drive and to bring Williamson the pay they wouldn't trust to us. I don't savvy nothing, but anyway, the old Indian wasn't satisfied with his cut, and he was blackmailing Williamson. So Williamson refused and sent me and Gus out to kill the blabber. But a wagon come down on us while we was doing it, and we dasn't stay. We thought we hit him, but there wasn't no blood out there this morning, and we couldn't find the Indian.
Bolger looked with agonized eyes at Laramie.
He didn't even tell you?
I don't speak no Spanish.
Oh my God. All for nothing. All for...
He began to cough, and Laramie turned away.
Well, kid, looks like you got your spread all set. Because what Williamson got paid will be adjudicated to be yourn. I better go back to my faro game.
Laramie, would you take a job of foreman at $150 a month?
Oh, sure. Glad to.
Old Aztec, huh?
The proprietor of the Emporium was saying.
Well, who'd have dreamt it? Why, that geezer and his wife used to come down here every couple of weeks selling me a lot of trash cheap. Like these.
Laramie turned, suddenly interested, and found that the storekeeper was holding up a very interesting item.
Fancy, huh? All the big ranch owners across the border carry them. Mark of a big man. $2.50 if you want one as a souvenir, Mr. Lair. Well, I see you already got one.
Laramie was stricken.
What's the matter?
Pleaded the kid, afraid. The deputy came in to find the sheriff.
We got Williamson. He was plugged so bad he fell out about a mile east of here. And a bunch brought him in. Let's go. Hey, what's the matter? Mr. Laramie?
But Laramie was past hearing. His eyes, resting on a rack of silver-feathered serpent quirts, 50, just like his own, began to glaze. The amulet slipped from his fingers to the floor, and old Laramie, dead faint, sagged down on top of it, out cold.